Okay, so we continue today in our series of Walking by Faith. We're looking at real people who faced real life and real situations. They weren't cushioned away by God, but they were people like us, they had flesh like us, they were weak like us, and they learned to trust God. They learned through difficulties and trials to actually walk with God. And today we come to Joshua, well-known character, and we're looking at the conditions of faith. And Micah read to us earlier on Joshua 23. So if you have that, we're going to park ourselves in Joshua 23 today. Very important you have the Bible in front of you, so that we can follow what God is saying in Joshua 23. Two or three things just to recap on last week, which I felt during the week was important to re-emphasize. The call of God. It's very important, like Moses had the call of God. We all as Christians need the call of God in our lives. Whatever we do, we need to know we're in the place that God has put us. And that does two or three things. Firstly, it completely transforms our attitude to work. Because we're working for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It might be monotonous, it might be routine, but we're working for God, we're servants of the living God, so it transforms our attitude to work, and often the way we work is a testimony in itself to the transforming work of God in our lives, to His grace. Secondly, when there are times when we want to give up, and probably everyone at one point wants to give up what they're doing, their job, their calling, the fact that God has called you there helps you to stick it. And third is, I was reminded this week by a very dear friend, sometimes God changes that call. And my dad used to have this saying, he said, as Christians, we're like scaffolding. And God can move the scaffolding to different parts of the building that He is building. He's building the church. He's doing it. The gates of hell won't prevail. So sometimes that calling changes. So it's always being sensitive to God. Again, just to put him in his historical setting, remember Abraham, he never dreamt it would take hundreds of years for God's promise to him to be fulfilled. But he went in obedience, didn't know where God was leading, but his obedience was the start of God doing great things. His great-great-grandson was taken against his will down to Egypt, but part of God's plan, so the whole family end up in Egypt. They settle in the land of Goshen. There are many years until a new Pharaoh comes to the throne, doesn't like them, and puts them into slavery. In God's plan and in God's timing, the human liberator comes into the scene. Moses is born, but principle number one, there's various principles here. These are not the 7 things that are coming later. First principle in the introduction is this. Sometimes God takes an enormous amount of time to what we think He should be doing now. It'll be another 80 years from the birth of Moses until they're actually liberated. God doesn't have our sense of time. He's out of time. And He often works in a way that sometimes frustrates us. Why can't He do this now? But He is working. And so under God's leadership, Moses takes them out of the Exodus, miracle after miracle, in the desert for many years. Now, that's where we got to last week. Now that Moses is on the way, he sends 12 spies into Canaan to suss out the land. He picks out 12 guys who he thinks can do the job well, guys with discernment, guys who can use their intellect and their sight and everything else and their senses. And they came back with 3 different stories. The first story they all agreed with is what God has said, is the fact that the land is flowing with milk and honey. It's a wonderful place to live. Mediterranean climate, loads of fruit, lots of grapes, great place to live. But 10 of the 12 gave a very negative report. They said, guys, you should see these fellas. They're huge. They eat a whole box of Weetabix for breakfast, not just 2 biscuits. These guys are massive. It's beyond us. The problem was that they were looking at the problem and not looking at God. And you and I can be tempted to do that. We face enormous decisions. We face enormous problems, great hurdles in our lives, and we look at the problem instead of being overwhelmed with the God who can do anything. Remember the angel last week speaking to Mary said, with God all things are possible. And so these guys looked at the problem and the difficulty instead of having their eyes on God. However, two of them agreed that it was a massive problem. It was going to be hard to actually conquer the land of Canaan. But these two looked beyond the problem to the God that they worshiped, to the God that they walked with by faith. And of course, there were Joshua and Caleb. And they said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. That's called walking by faith. Humanly speaking, impossible. We've already seen what God has done, and that's why it's so good to look back in your life and remind yourself of the miracles that God has already done. Look, if he can open up the sea, if he can dry the ground for us to walk through, if he can provide food every day for 40 years and our clothes not wear out, who are the Jerichos? Who are the guys living in Canaan? They're nothing to God. And you see, God is pleased when we demonstrate radical, persistent faith, because the Bible says without faith, it is impossible to please God. And he calls you and me to walk a walk of faith. A story told of Napoleon. This is a famous picture here of him crossing the Pyrenees on his horse. He had conquered France. He had conquered all the north of Europe. He was now going to go down and conquer Spain. And on the journey, and he had tens of thousands of troops in his army, one little private soldier came up to him. The general surrounding Napoleon says, go away, you're just one of the ordinary foot soldiers. This is the great Emperor Napoleon. Go away. Napoleon says, no. Let him come to me and give me his request. The fact he's coming to me with his problem, with his request, shows how great he thinks I am. That I can solve his issue. And see, when we demonstrate faith in God, what we're actually doing is saying how great he is. Demonstrating faith. And when we don't demonstrate faith, we upset him. We grieve the Holy Spirit. Because what we're actually saying, God can't do this. Unbelief holds us back. Not the lack of faith. The guy with the son who had epilepsy and filled with bad spirits, he said, I believe, help my unbelief. But he had some faith. It wasn't total unbelief. Unbelief holds us back. Well, here is Moses. I feel sorry for him. 2 million people, always complaining, always mumbling and groaning. And they asked for water. So God said, just touch the rock. But of course, he lashed out. And God says, well, you won't be able to go into the promised land. But God was so gracious. He said, go up to this mountain and actually look into the promised land. The land that I promised years and years and years ago to Abraham. This is where it is. I think two principles come out of this picture. One, God does use human beings, but he doesn't rely on a single human being to fulfill his purpose. The second thing that comes out, very important, God buried Moses. And I believe the reason he did that, so that nobody would set up a shrine to Moses. We tend to worship people, don't we? Worship great leaders, worship great preachers and teachers and whatever. God says, no, he was just an ordinary man. Yes, my friend, he was my servant. But don't worship him. Set your eyes on God. So now that Moses is dead, God now anoints Joshua. Key words in the beginning of the book. He says, my servant is dead, now therefore arise. Cross the Jordan, you and all the people, to the land that I'm giving you to the sons of Israel. Here is a great example of discipling. Joshua didn't suddenly come on the scene like a lot of these Tory leaders that apparently we never heard of who want to be prime minister. No, he has been trained for years and years and years by Moses. And discipleship is God's way forward in his church. Discipling one another. Training. And so God has been training him for many years and now says to him, be strong and courageous. Great task. All these 2 million people to lead on into the promised land. Now, I don't know if you realize that there are actually 3 people in the Bible that didn't have parents. They're never able to celebrate Father's Day. But, of course, Adam and Eve, they didn't have parents. Joshua didn't. What it says in your Bible, it says in Joshua 1 verse 1, now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun. There you go. No parents, poor guy. Couldn't send that father's birthday card. Now, Joshua sends 2 spies into the land. Why does he do it? God's already told him that he is giving the power to overcome and to conquer the land. Why does Joshua send 2 spies? Is he saying, I don't trust God's plan? No. We saw this principle last week. The sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man go hand in hand. Yes, God is going to do the work. He's going to give them victory, but he still has to engage his brain. He has to plan like a military campaign. He has to know what to do and where to put his men and how many in the brigade and so on. He has to use his mind under the sovereignty of God. See, Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. You know, we used to have these girls in Bible college that maybe drop a spoon. They said, what's the Lord saying to me? I said, sweetheart, he's saying pick it up. Engage the brain. We don't just sit there and wait for a message to come. We study the Word of God. Do you think for one moment, all of us who teach back here in YP and the Ark, do you think we just suddenly turn up and say, well, God's going to do the work? No, there's hours of mind work. There's hours of preparation. The sovereignty of God goes hand in hand with the responsibility of man. And so Joshua sends in his spies. You know the story of how Rahab helped the 2 spies escape. And they come to Joshua and tell what they've seen. And I love this verse in Joshua 2:24. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Let's step out in faith. There is hope for the hopeless. So the sovereignty of God and the responsibility. Just imagine what's going through Joshua's mind. Whoa. Imagine taking over after that great leader Moses. Must have been daunting. How can I compare to him? Well, don't compare. You are your own man. And God is going to lead you in that step. And so he leads the people. He calls them forward, but he's walking in faith that God will do what he does. I think principle number 3 in the introduction here is they had to cross the river Jordan. But it was only as the priest walked into the water that the water divided. You can imagine the scene, can't you? Whoa, should we go a little bit further? What's going to happen? It's not parting. It's not parting. What should we do? Keep going, man. Keep going. As you obey, God does the miracle. As we step forward in faith, knowing God's call, he then does the miracle and provides. Another very important principle in this. God said, pick up stones, 12 stones from the river, and make a memorial. Why? Because in time, God knows humans forget what God has done. That's why next Sunday, we devote the whole service to the Lord's Supper, every 4th Sunday, because we forget what God has done. This do in remembrance of me. And it does us good to sit and to think through all the things that God has done. It creates faith. If he can do that, then he can do this. And so they built that memorial. I wonder what Joshua was thinking as he was looking over that land. He was human, but he was walking by faith. There were massive obstacles to overcome. Jericho, Ai would be setbacks. Of course, everyone knows the story here of Jericho. But although he had his military plans, God said, let's do it differently. Get the priests to get their trumpets and walk around the wall. So they went around blowing their trumpets, which must have been a blast. And as they walked around, they thought, another day, another day, another day, nothing is happening. So you're praying for somebody in your family to get converted. Another day, another year, another thing. God still hasn't done it. Keep going, man. Keep walking. Also, what he's doing is psyching up his troops. This is the human side. A neighbor of mine, when I lived in that glorious place, Lime Grove, which I highly recommend, my neighbor actually was on the aircraft carrier, the Hermes, going down to the Falklands War. And he took me on the Hermes afterwards. And he said the 3 weeks that it took them to get down to the Falklands, they were all being psyched up by the commanding leaders for warfare. The sovereignty of God, he's told them to walk around the walls. He's going to break the walls down. But Joshua is working on his troops. He's encouraging them. He's getting them ready. They still have to go into the city and they still have to kill. The walls was God's job. That was opening up the way for them to go in. They still had to physically go and fight. So he psychs them up. Of course, the people on the wall think, oh, what a crazy lot these are. Let me tell you something. If you walk by faith, the world is going to think you're crazy. They will not understand you. It seems stupid to be in church on Sunday morning where you could be doing something all day, where you could be lying in. Crazy, these people. They actually trust God and they believe him. But let me tell you this. The people who think you're crazy now won't when God moves in judgment. There is a judgment day. The people laughed at Noah. Stupid man building a boat. They weren't laughing when they were drowning. And people can laugh at you and me, laugh at our faith, laugh at our standards and values of living, which are different from theirs. When God's judgment comes, they will not be laughing. Remember that. When you're tempted to envy the world. Do you remember the psalmist, Psalm 73? He said, I was looking around all these ungodly people. Life is so great for them. Until I went into the house of the Lord, and then I perceived their end. When I got my perspective right, I could see that those who aren't going God's way are in for destruction. And these people who laughed, when God moves, let me tell you, he doesn't do it only in small ways. And God brings victory for those who walk in faith. For the next 7 years, it took them to conquer that land. There was a day when Joshua was doing really well, and he asked the Lord to make sure the sun stood for a bit longer so they can have a bit more daylight. Now let's have a look at 23. That's the build-up. Joshua 23. Let's just read the first 5 verses. After a long time had passed and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then old and well advanced in years, summoned all Israel and their elders, leaders and judges and officials, and said to them, I am old and well advanced in years. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have already allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the lands and the nations that remain, the nations I conquer between the Jordan and the Great Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will drive out these people from your way. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of their land as the Lord your God promised you. End of his life. What does he do? Give a big CV of how great he has been and what he's accomplished? No, he said, the Lord's done it. The Lord's done it. And I hope at our funerals it's the Lord that gets the praise and the glory, not us. Because he's the one that's done the work. Let's just pause and pray for a moment. Father, as we come now to look at these 7 things on the sheets, we pray that you'll open our hearts, open our minds, and thrill us with yourself. We submit to the authority of your word. We pray now you'll glorify yourself and lead us forward in faith in Jesus' name. Amen. Oh, thank you. So, what's the scene? Joshua now, at the end of his life, he brings the leaders together. Now, I don't know if there's no wasted words in the Bible. Not only does he bring the elders, the leaders of the people, he brings the head of every household. Today is Father's Day. No mistake by the sovereignty of God that we're looking at this chapter on Father's Day. God has placed fathers as the spiritual head of the home. Pray God will meet that responsibility. He brings the leaders together and he says, guys, learn from the past. He is now setting up what he has experienced himself and what God says in his word. Learning from the past to prepare for the future. He is going to say to them in the next chapter, guys, you're going to make a choice here as families, but as far as I'm concerned and my family, we are going to follow the Lord. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed. I'm making that stand today that my family, as the leader of my home, I am telling you, my family is going to follow the Lord. And he comes to these very important words in verse 6. You can sum it all up in 3 words. As I am about to go to glory, he says to you, the one thing I want to pass on, be very strong. Very interesting that they are virtually the same words. If you compare chapter 1, where he got his ministry call, to chapter 23, when he's finishing and about to go to glory, he repeats a lot of the words that God gave him. And what he's doing, he's passing on the same advice that God gave him to the people of the future. But he says one thing, guys, I proved it to be true. It's not just stale theology. It's real, it's practical, it works. He's already said that in the verses we've read. Look what God has done for you. And he now gives 7 ways in which you and I are to be very strong. It's in your message sheets. I've left 7 things, so you don't give them away beforehand. You can write them down, 7 ways in which we can be very strong. First one, verse 6. Obey God. You see it there? Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or to the left. Let's analyze that verse together. He says, be careful to obey. Why did he just say obey God? He says, be careful to obey. Do you remember when we looked at Cain and Abel? And we saw that when Christians backslide and move away from God, it's because they have become careless. They become careless about listening to God every day. They become careless about developing a prayer life. They become careless about meeting with God's people on a regular basis. They become careless about what they allow their eyes to see, what they feed their minds with. They become careless. So he says, if you want to be very strong, be careful to obey. It takes guts. It takes discipline. But you and I are called to be disciples. He goes on in that verse, we analyze it. Be careful to obey all that is written. You see that? You can't just pick and choose the bits of the Bible that you like. It's like, I don't like broccoli, I'm not going to have it. No, we need the whole counsel of God. Be careful to obey all that is written. And then he goes on in that verse 6. without turning aside to the right or left. What's he saying? If you want to be very strong, be careful to obey all that God is saying to you without compromise. Do not compromise the word of God. If we are to be strong as a church, if we are to be strong as families and individual Christians, we cannot compromise the word of God. Moses actually said a similar thing back in Deuteronomy. He told the people, you must be careful to obey all the commands. Be careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God, following his instructions in every detail. Obedience. If you want to be very strong, he says, then live a life of obedience. The second thing he says, if you want to be very strong, is in verse 7. Do not copy the ungodly world around you. Do you see verse 7? Do not associate with those nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. Do not copy the ungodly world. Now, please don't go and live in a monastery. It's not what this is saying. Live in the real world. Connect to those who don't know God. But don't copy their value system. Don't do what they're doing if it's against God's word. You see, the first thing that Moses found out on that mountain when he got called by God is that God is holy. And he asked his people to be holy. He asked you and me to pursue godliness. It isn't something that we just do as a hobby. This is actually pursuing godliness to become more and more like Jesus. The lovely hymn that says this: take time to be holy. Speak oft with your Lord. Abide in him always and feed on his word. By looking to Jesus, like him you will be. Your friends in your conduct, his likeness shall see. Be holy. Be different. Don't go with the flow. Be different. Have the guts to be different. In your attitudes, in your outlook, in your behavior, in your speech. Paul says this to the Romans. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. How do we do that? By the renewing of your mind. Let me tell you, the battle happens in our minds. It's in our minds we either get victory or failure. Which is why Philippians 4:8 says, whatever is good and wholesome and true, think about those things. Why? Because what you think, you are. You spend your life thinking selfish thoughts, you become a selfish person. You think godly thoughts, you become a godly person. The mind is the key, and God is holy. And he calls you and me to be holy too. James, in writing in his book, chapter 4, verse 4, says, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility with God? Guys, you can't have one foot in the world and one foot with God. Can't do it. He says, if you want to be very strong, do not copy the ungodly world around you. So, if you're going to be strong, he says, live a life of obedience. Do not copy the ungodly world around you. And thirdly, he says in verse 8, cling to God. You see it there? But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. Never, ever, ever lose a sense of total dependency upon God. You see, you might go to work the same, it's another Monday. I'm going to the same place yet again. I've taught this Sunday school class years and years. I can do it. No, you can't. It's God that changes hearts and lives, not you, not me. We should never lose a sense of dependency upon God. There's a little creature called the limpet. And the limpet actually has a suction pad underneath it that clings to rock. So no matter how bad the tempest, no matter how much the waves are lashing down, as long as that limpet is clinging to the rock, it cannot be moved. And there it is. There's the picture of it on the screen. The suction keeps it from being moved. A bit like those stupid soap things you have. You put these bars of soap in this, and you try and get the soap off, and you end up taking the whole sink off the wall. The only way you will ever get a limpet in your hand, as this picture shows, is if slowly and quietly you come up behind it, and the limpet has this false sense of security. It's okay, everything is calm, there's no waves, no problem. That's the time you can pick it up, and that's when the devil gets you and me. When we think we're okay, I can handle this temptation, I can handle this day, I can go to work without referring to God first. As the hymn says, keep us, Lord, oh keep us cleaving to yourself and still believing till the hour of our receiving promised joys in heaven. Cling to God. Always depend upon him. Why? Because Jesus said, without me you can do nothing. Trouble is, we don't really believe him. We can come up and lead worship, we can come up and preach, we can come up and... No, you can't. Without me, you can do nothing. Nothing. You can't even parent properly without him on Father's Day. That's why in your Digging Deeper notes this week for your small groups, please do those questions. That's how you're going to grow. Here's a question I put into the Digging Deeper. You can start to think about it. How can we easily lose our sense of dependency on God? Start to think about that for your small groups this week. How can we easily lose a sense of dependency on God? Some years ago, I took my tutor group from Crofton School on a cycle ride to Holland. Probably insane at the time, but I took the whole class on this trip. Now, to do it, it was classified as a hazardous pursuit. And so I had to get trained by Hampshire County Council. Dane Oliver was the guy. And they took us to Calshot, and it was February, it was freezing cold, there was snow on the ground. And one of the things I had to prove to this guy, I had to lead 40 adults through the New Forest on their bikes. And when I could prove I could do it safely, then he gave me the certificate, which we never got, did we? He gave me the certificate to actually take this lot. You know, it's true, isn't it? I mean, it was a hazardous pursuit. Anything could have happened. They could have got killed. We could have all sorts. I mean, I chose Holland because it's all flat. But also it's got 6,000 miles of cycle ride. So I thought this is probably the safest place to go. But there was dangers. But you know, the biggest danger wasn't the cycling. And we only got one puncture all week. It wasn't that the most dangerous thing. The most dangerous and stressful thing was getting all these Year 11s through the underground in London during rush hour. And I said to them, I don't care if you are 16 years of age, you are going to take your hand and put it on the shoulder of the person in front of you. And I marched the whole class of Year 11s through the underground, through thousands of people, clinging on to the person in front of them. That's how I got them through. Joshua says, you can't get through life without clinging onto God. Never lose your sense of dependency upon him. Never face a single day without having a sense of dependency, because without him, you and I can do nothing. Fourthly, he says, verse 11, love God. Do you see it there? Verse 11? Got to find it first. Very simple verse. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. You see, our key relationship to God is a love relationship. I said last week that some Christians can get very boring. I'll tell you why they get boring. It's because they lose that passion and their love for God. But look at the words carefully. It says, be careful to love the Lord your... Why? Why, Joshua? Simply because you can fall out of love. Be careful. Guard your love relationship to God more than anything else in your life. And that comes out in Proverbs 4:23. Guard your heart above all else, for this is the source of life. That's why Jesus said the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, as well as your soul, your mind, your strength. And by the way, don't be ashamed of loving him. When's the last time you actually said to the Lord you loved him? When? It's a love relationship. And that is the key basis of our walking with God by faith. Keep that love on fire. Be very strong by obeying God, by not copying the world around you, by clinging in dependence upon God, about guarding and growing that love relationship with him. And in that context, he says in verse 12, guard your other relationships. Look at verse 12. If you turn away and ally yourself with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. The reason why I made you read that, I am not making this up. It's in the Bible. Guard your heart, above all else, for it determines the course of your life. For 26 years, I led the youth work in this church. Of the hundreds, and I do not exaggerate, the hundreds of young people that pass through our hands, the vast majority who are not walking with God today is because they got into a wrong relationship. You can tell them you're blue in the face, and you think that they say you're being judgmental. It's in the Bible. Some years ago, Joel and I went to Hamburg in Germany, and we noticed that all the bridges across the river had loads and loads of padlocks. So we asked somebody, why are all these padlocks here? And they said it's quite simple. When two people get married, they go to a bridge in Hamburg over the river, and they actually lock a padlock on the bridge and throw the key in the water. This is for life. The reason why Israel went down the pan is because Solomon intermarried with people. I mean, how crazy? 300 mother-in-laws. How crazy is that? But what happened by marrying these people, they introduced idolatry into Israel, and Israel never recovered because of wrong relationships. You know, the best dating advice I ever heard was this: run hard after God. Pursue him. Run hard after God. And if somebody of the opposite gender can keep up, then start talking to them. Go for God first, because that's where your heart will go. Watch your relationships. That says, if you can't read it, how many times shall I say that she is not the one for you? Guard your relationships. If you want to be strong. Sixthly, he says, if you want to be strong, then live for eternity. Look at verse 14. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. He's facing up to the fact that he's going to die. I have news for you. Unless Jesus comes back, we're going to die too. We're not here forever. This is temporary. It blows my mind that people plan for all sorts of things, but they don't plan for eternity. They take out insurance for fire. They take out insurance for holidays. They take insurance for all, but they don't take out eternal insurance. Joshua said, if you want to be strong, then live with eternity in mind. Life is short. Live for eternity. Some years ago, I took 15 of our young people out to Spain. Give them a nudge, because I'm going to talk about them now. I took these people out to Spain because at the time we were supporting two missionaries, Clive and Angela Harvey, who were missionaries in Madrid. So I negotiated with the famous Ocol people, and I said, I know you run these buses down to Spain. can I take 15 of my young people on this bus with you down to Spain? Well, Andy Downing's all right, because he has this tablet that knocks him out for 24 hours. This was 24 hours stuck in this stupid bus, all the way through France. Anyway, we eventually got down to Malgrat, which is just outside Barcelona, and we literally camped on the edge of the beach for 1 week, enjoying their luscious food. And then we got the overnight train into Madrid, and we met up with the missionaries. And one day, Clive, the missionary, took us to this place here on the screen. It's a very unique place. It's a big building with loads and loads of coffins. Not Julie, she wasn't there. But there are loads and loads of coffins. And all the kings of Spain from Philip II are buried there. Philip II was the guy that sent the Armada, but we sussed him out. Probably couldn't do that now with our navy, but we sussed him out then. And it's full of coffins of all the kings of Spain, but there's one empty coffin. Do you know what that's for? This guy, the present king of Spain, Juan Carlos II. And I said to the missionary Clive, I said, it must be weird when Wally boy comes in here and he looks around and he said, you know, I'm going to be there one day. It does you no harm to remember one day you'll be dead. It's then that your relationship to Jesus Christ will count. Doesn't matter. You know, yesterday I stuck a thing in the front of my Bible. Let me read it to you. 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove. The only thing that will matter in 100 years' time is my relationship to Jesus Christ. So why don't you get right with God today? Because you can't guarantee tomorrow. Every year I used to take my year 10s at Crofton School to the local cemetery. A bit of a dead-end lesson, but I took them in there. I made them stand in the middle, surrounded by all these graves. I said, guys, one day you're going to be in here. It might be very soon if you don't do your coursework, but you'll be in here one day while you still have breath in your body. Get right with God. Joshua says, if you want to be strong, then live in the light of eternity. And lastly, he says, if you want to be strong, learn to trust God. Learn to trust Him. It's a life of faith that He calls us to. Lovely hymn that I know Alan likes, Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh for grace to trust Him more. Let that faith grow. Learn to trust God. Learn to walk by faith. It's so exciting. But maybe you say, well, this life of faith, where do I start on this life of faith? How do I actually become a Christian? Well, the first thing is you address the sin problem. It's sin that separates you and me from God. We confess our sin. We repent of our sin. And through repentance we turn in faith to Jesus, who alone can make us right with God. He then gives us the precious gift of forgiveness. You see, becoming a Christian starts at the cross. It's there that you learn to trust God with your eternity. The biggest step of faith you'll ever make. Trusting God with something you can't see. Your eternity. And you learn to walk by faith. So, Joshua, as you leave this world to go to the next, what are you going to say? He said 3 words. Be very strong. You do that by living a life of obedience. Not compromising the word of God. Doesn't matter what other people are saying, obeying God. Secondly, by not copying the ungodly world around you. Thirdly, by clinging in complete dependence upon God every single day. Fourthly, he says, if you want to be strong, develop and guard your love relationship with God. Let that grow. And doing that, guard your other relationships. Relationships are going to compromise your love for God. Live with the light of eternity always in mind, and learn to trust God. Be strong in the Lord, Paul says to the Ephesians, and in the strength of His might. God did not give Joshua an option. When he had his ministry call in chapter 1, God says this, I command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This walk of faith is with the God who created you, the God who can save you. You're walking every day with him. Joshua, what an example of a strong, courageous faith. And the same Joshua who addressed those people that day, even though he is dead, still speaks. He speaks to you and me today in our situation here at PBC. And he says simply this, be strong. In fact, he goes one step further. He says, be very strong. Or be a wimp. That's our choice. Let's pray. We're so grateful, Father, for giving us the example of people like Joshua who lived a real life in the real world with huge difficulties, and yet, by faith, he saw victory. Pray that each of us will see victory every day in our lives, in our minds, in our relationships. Help us to listen to you through your word, to obey you, to love you more than anything and anyone else. Help us to enjoy you as we walk in faith. And please, Lord, the one request, that you take all the focus, all the glory, all the attention, and all the credit as we offer it to you in the name of Jesus. Amen.